Hello and welcome to the last of your video lecture series here in MGMT 680. I'm here at Hemlock Lake, one of the westernmost Finger Lakes down here in Livingston County. Hemlock Lake is very famous because Hemlock Lake is where Rochester gets its water. In 1852, they approved a pipeline that's gravity fed from this lake, Hemlock Lake, that goes into Rochester, and that's where Rochester gets their city water. In order to keep the water as pure as they possibly could, back in 1892, the city of Rochester bought up all of the farms and all the cottages on this lake. So there are no farms nor cottages on this lake to keep this lake as pure as it possibly can. Those people that didn't sell back in 1895 were victims of eminent domain. One of the reasons I'm telling you about that is because this is all about environmental sustainability. It is a corporation's job. It is their responsibility for the sustainability of this planet. Not only for environmental sustainability, but also for labor sustainability and for corruption and things like that. We are going to talk about social responsible marketing at the end of this chapter. The last, about half of the chapter is all about social responsible marketing. But the beginning of the chapter is going to be about going global and different strategies about going global, ways to go global, whether you're going to use a waterfall effect or a sprinkler effect, or are you born global? All those types of things are going to be talked about in the beginning of the chapter. We're going to talk about the different ways to enter foreign markets, the different strategies behind those ways to enter foreign markets, and we're also going to talk a little bit about distribution within the foreign markets and how to distribute products. It all depends on whether you're going to export or license or contract manufacture, all those types of things. Your product depends upon it. Then we're also going to talk about, do you keep a similar product in all markets, or do you use different products? And do you keep a similar communication strategy in all the different markets? So again, this is your last video lecture. I don't think I have to tell you by now, but at the end of this lecture, please give me a two-page memo, page and a half, two-page memo on key takeaways that you've got from this chapter. And until then, let's get started, and I will see you on Monday. So as I stated in the introduction, today's lecture is all about managing marketing responsibility and also the global economy. So the global industry is just that. It's the group of all the competitors in the industry. Not only does that include like products, but it also includes substitutes, etc. For instance, if you look at the soft drink market, obviously Coke and Pepsi are worldwide competitors, but there's also other substitutes in that market, which would be energy drinks and vitamin drinks, etc. And they're also part of the global industry when it comes to soft drinks. Even though they're not direct competitors, they are certainly what we would call substitutes. The global firm is just that. It's one of the entities that compete within the global market. Now, a global firm does not necessarily mean that it's selling products in all the different markets. For instance, your R&D could come out of China, for instance, or your R&D could come out of India, and you use that R&D to sell into Western Europe, or you use that R&D to sell into the United States or Canada or someplace like that. Even though you're not selling product in one company, in one country, or you're only selling product in one country, if in fact your R&D or your materials or something else comes from a different country, that still qualifies you as a global firm. Most people think of global firm of those people that are doing business from a selling product standpoint in different countries, etc. But that doesn't necessarily hold true. You could be a global firm by sourcing from different countries, having your R&D in different countries, or having business and selling in different countries. So really the decisions in international marketing, and the first thing we need to do is decide whether we're going to go abroad. Again, it goes to your target market. If you have a strong target market abroad, then it's more attractive to do that. For instance, if you're looking at, say, young millennials, etc., and you're looking at going abroad, China would be a very attractive market because they have millions, billions actually, of millennials in China. So again, everything in marketing starts with your target market. Who are you going to do what to? So when you decide whether you're going to go abroad, you decide whether that has a large target market for your products and services or whether it doesn't. If it does, then you can make the decision that you do want to go abroad, you want to sell in that particular country or multiple countries. And then you decide which markets to enter. So is China a good market? India a good market? You look at the BRIC markets, that would be Brazil, Russia, India, and China. We call those BRICS, B-R-I-C markets, because they have a lot of strong middle class. So if that would be part of your target market, you go there. Then you want to decide how to enter that market. We're going to talk about that in a few slides. And whether that be licensing, exporting, contract manufacturing, joint ventures, all those different types of ways of going abroad. Then you got to decide your marketing program. Is it going to be, and think, when you're thinking about your marketing program, thinking about the 4 Ps or your marketing mix. Are you going to sell the same product? Are you going to sell a different product? Are you going to have the same promotional message or the same communication message? What are you going to do with pricing, and how are you going to distribute? So if you look at your 4 Ps, price, product, promotion, and place, you've got to decide, are you going to go standard with all of them? Are you going to go standard with a few? Or are you going to have different products, different communications, etc., for different market? And that goes to economies of scale. And then finally, you got to decide on your marketing organization. Are you going to run it domestically or have a marketing organization in that country? Or are you going to run it all from the country in which you're producing? So all of those are decisions that a marketing manager needs to make. And all of those decisions we're going to talk about in the next few slides, starting with deciding on whether you're going to go abroad. Factors that draw companies into the international arena, the number one is profit. You've got to be able to sell a lot at a good profit margin. Just because you can sell a lot doesn't necessarily mean that it is a good market. The market has to be profitable also. And if you look at your pricing, purchasing power parity, and all of you guys understand that because you all went through international business, but if you look at purchasing power parity, you might have to sell a product because of what they can afford in that particular country under what you can make it at. At that point in time, if you look at it, because of PPP, you might find that your that market is not attractive. You also need to look at your customer base. Can you make a living on that customer base? It might be a very profitable customer base and you might have high margins there. However, if it's a small customer base, it might not be profitable and it might not be attractive to enter. The other thing that you've got to take a look at is the number of competitors in that market. And are you late to the game in that market? If you are, then you're going to have to buy market share or cut your price in order to develop or gain market share. And in that case, it might not be attractive. And then finally, you've got to look at the international laws. You got to look at the international economics, and you got to look at the political climate of some of those countries. If you look at South America, sometimes some of those political climates of those countries are not favorable in which to do business. The same thing with some of the countries in Africa when it comes to some of those countries that are rich in bribery and other things like that. So deciding whether to go abroad, before you make a decision, you got to take a look at the risks, and those would be the political risks, the economic risk, the risk of reverse engineering. Oftentimes that's a big risk of going into China and going into Russia. Is reverse engineering. You sell a product into that, pretty soon they reverse engineer because they really don't recognize patents and intellectual property as an asset in some of those countries. They can reverse engineer
they can get by patents, and now they're selling your product in their country and you're not getting any revenue for it. You also got to understand culture. Culture is very, very key in how you're going to go market into the country. You got to look at things like literacy rates. You got to look at things like religion. You've got to look at the way that people act, family values, etc. And then again, regulations and also the stability of the political climate. You could do a foreign direct investment in a particular country, and then that country have a civil war or something like that, or a coup, and they seize your factory to make weapons or something like that. So lots and lots and lots of different risk factors that one must weigh before they go abroad. And those risk factors are also going to determine how you go abroad. If the country is politically unstable, you might want to not do foreign direct investment. You might want to do exporting, or you might want to do licensing or something like that. So how many markets to enter? There's the waterfall approach, which means you're going to enter one market, you're going to flood that market like a waterfall, and then you're going to move on to a next market. So you might take it and you might go into Western Europe as a waterfall approach. Once you are strong there, you might want to go to the Middle East as a waterfall approach. Once you're strong there, you might want to look at the Asian markets, maybe a specific region in China, or a specific region in India, or maybe Japan or something like that. Or you can do the sprinkler approach. And the sprinkler approach means hitting multiple markets at once. You're going to launch multiple products, multiple markets at one point in time. So think of your sprinkler, one of those sprinklers that goes versus the one that goes like that. Did you like that sound effect? I thought that was pretty good. And then finally, born global. Some companies are born to enter all the markets at once. In other words, as they hit their domestic market, they hit all of the other foreign markets as well. So they look at the whole globe as their market versus just looking at a domestic market first. And that's what we call born global. So, modes of foreign market entry, starting from the least amount of risk to the most amount of risk. The least amount of risk is indirect exporting, which means you give it to an export agent, and the export agent picks it up on your doorstep here in America, and they have all of the control. They export it, they do all of the paperwork, they do all of the funding, everything as you go into different markets. So basically what you're doing is you're producing a product here, and oftentimes you're either selling it to that indirect exporter, and then they are buying the product right from your doorstep, and then they are taking it to different foreign markets, or you are giving them a brokerage fee, an agent fee, in order to do that. And they're still handling all of the transactions, etc. Yet you're paying them a fee, and they're handling it for you. Then you have direct exporting, which means you are responsible for setting up your own distribution system in those other countries. So you're manufacturing it here in the United States, and then you have different logistics and transportation companies that you have set up. You've got different warehousing and different distribution systems in those particular countries in which you're exporting, and you are either licensing through those or you're owning through those, and then you are selling into that market. The next one is licensing. Licensing means that you are giving the license of your product. You're giving all the intellectual properties of your product into a particular country and letting somebody else manufacture it. Take a look at a consumer product. Let's say a soft drink. Let's say you've got a vitamin water here that's doing very, very well in the United States. You could go over to a soft drink producer or a water producer, in, say, London or France and license your recipe to them, they manufacture it and they give usually a 5 to 10% royalty. They own everything they manufacture. They give it back to you on a royalty fee. The problem with licensing is they can license your brand, they can license your intellectual property and do with whatever they want. Therefore, you've lost all control. For instance, if you want to keep it as a high-end product, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do that in the countries in which you particularly do business, and then that might hurt you domestically. Nike does a tremendous amount of licensing, and they simply license that swoosh. The NBA, National Basketball Association, does a lot of licensing, especially one of their biggest markets right now for licensing is in China, because a lot of the, what was the guy named? 7'2" basketball player out of China, Yao Ming. Because of Yao Ming being a hero back in China, NBA merchandise is very, very popular over there. The NBA does a lot of licensing through there. The other one would be joint ventures, and that would be setting up a joint either manufacturing or distribution or R&D or licensing over in another country. We see a lot of joint ventures in what we would call big pharma or pharmaceuticals, where a company like Pfizer and a company like Merck would set up a joint venture in order to have a pill to do something or a drug that does something. If Pfizer, let's say they are good with blood pressure and Merck is good with heart attacks, they make a pill that will reduce blood pressure and prevent heart attacks both. That way they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Finally, you have direct investment. And direct investment is building a factory, building a network over in another country. That has the highest risk because it's the most expensive. And if the political climate is unstable, then it could be very detrimental because the government could seize whatever your direct investment and you could lose everything. So the next few slides are going to talk about what I talked about over the last slide, the difference between indirect exporting, direct exporting, and licensing. We talked about that. I've given you examples. You can take a look underneath the slides, Kotler's examples, but basically I've explained that to you. Here's joint venture and direct investment. One of the things that we just make sure that you remember is indirect exporting is the least amount of risk, because really you're letting somebody else do everything. And direct investment is the most amount of risk because you're putting factories or you're investing into those particular countries. Most countries would prefer direct investment because when you're investing, when you're building, when you're employing people within that country, it helps the economy of that country. So most governments, if you're going to do business in a particular country, would prefer the direct investment way. So deciding on marketing program would be the next thing. The advantages, you can't see that because I'm blocking it. The advantages are economies of scale. If you use the same marketing program in all of the same countries, you can really have great economies of scale. You don't have to do multiple creatives. You don't have to do multiple commercials. You don't have to have multiple products. You don't have to have multiple inventories, etc. It actually lowers your marketing costs and it increases your power and scope because you have lower marketing costs, because you have different ways of doing it. We call that global standardization. We've talked about global standardization with Starbucks. We also talked about global standardization with Coca-Cola, and we've talked about global standardization with Apple and the iPhone. All of those employ a global standardization approach because the products are the products in every single market. Gives you consistency in brand image and uniformity of marketing practices. The disadvantages is it doesn't take into consideration culture of other countries. Sometimes the culture will get in your way and you would fail. A different response to marketing programs. Some find some names, products, etc. offensive. There's different brand development processes and all types of things in different countries. Let's face it, there is a huge difference in culture between countries out there, especially as you go regional, from say Middle Eastern to Western European to Asian, etc. To treat all of those cultures the same is very risky, unless, of course, you have a product that transcends all of those different cultures. So one of the decisions in your product and communication strategy is just that. Are you going to keep the same product and not change? Or are you going to adapt a product? Or are you going to develop a brand new product? And are you going to keep the communication the same? Or are you going to adapt communication? So if you don't change the product and don't change your communication, that's a straight extension. That is what we call global standardization. And then you've got product adaptation, which means same communication, different product. And then you've got product invention, which is new products with the communication either the same or not. And then you can see the communication adaptation here and the dual adaptation. This makes for great test questions, guys. So I'm just letting you know, make sure you really understand this slide. I love this matrix because really, if you think about it, going back to that marketing mix, the 4 Ps, this takes into consideration 2 of the major decisions that a marketing manager needs to make as they're going global. One of them, obviously, being the communication or the promotion, and the other one being the product. We're going to get into pricing in just a minute. So again, product strategy, product invention, you've got backward invention and forward invention. Backward invention reintroduces an earlier product into a market that's never had it. So that would be like introducing the iPhone 7 into Asia. Or forward intervention is creating a brand new product to meet needs in other countries that we're not selling in the United States, which would be, say, an iPhone XE for Europe versus the iPhone X here domestically. So you've got forward invention and you got backward invention. Oftentimes, in order to enter a new market, companies will do backward invention. It does 2 things. It enters a market more cheaply than having to develop or invent a new product. Second of all, oftentimes it will help reduce inventory that you can't sell here. For instance, if you've made product adaptations and you're selling new models here, sometimes they want to get rid of the old models that they have in inventory. At that point in time, they will introduce it as a backward invention in another country, therefore reducing their risk in that country and reducing their inventory in the domestically produced country. Pricing, my goodness gracious, pricing is a real challenge. I was going to say problem, but it's not a problem. It's a challenge for most marketing managers. And the reason is because of PPP. If you think about it, think about purchasing price parity. Our middle class here is about $70,000 per year household income. If you look at China's middle class, it's about $17,000 to $22,000 a year household income. There is a huge discrepancy. So obviously, the prices for, say, an iPhone that we set here, which is about $1,000, would not be compatible there. They just don't make the money that we make here. Even though there's a strong middle class and they're an emerging middle class in these BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, their middle class standards are much lower than our middle class standards from an income standpoint. Not maybe necessarily from a quality of living standpoint, but from an income standpoint. And that's a key difference. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this because I spent probably 4 weeks on it in international business. And you've all learned about it in international business. But if you think about middle class there at, say, a BRIC countries being somewhere between $17,000 and $22,000, and middle class here being anywhere between $50,000 and $75,000, there's a big discrepancy. So as you move products into that, you've got to be very, very careful about how you price them. You've got to price them so that the market will accept it, but you also have to price it in order to make a profit. And then there's international dumping rules, which means you can't sell a product in a country for lower than you manufacture it. So that has to be in consideration as you're setting prices in other countries. There's all kinds of different international dumping laws, and it goes, and really the main one is you can't sell a product in a particular country for lower than its cost to manufacture. The other thing is you can't create predatory pricing in different countries too, in order to put somebody out of business and then raise your price later, which many companies will do. For instance, they'll enter a market, they'll price their product way below market pricing in order to run their competitors out of business. When their competitors are out of business, they'll raise their prices, and therefore they will own the market, have actually a monopoly on the market. That's part of international dumping laws too. You can't do it. Some people do get away with it. I'm not going to name names, but I know of about 3 or 4 of them that can. Generally speaking, they're huge multinational conglomerate companies. So do you want to have uniform pricing everywhere? Very difficult to do because of PPP. Do you want to have market-based pricing? That is just about what everybody does. They will price the product in a market depending on PPP, depending on the middle class, depending on the income levels of that, and also depending on competition, as well as depending on not only competition, but substitutes. And then finally, cost-based price. Oftentimes that's not used. It is used for international dumping requirements, but most people don't use cost-based price because the cost is much lower than what they're selling in different markets. Sometimes they do use a markup price, especially if it's a foreign direct investment. So again, pricing is a real challenge for businesses everywhere, and it's a real challenge for your international marketing manager. Price escalation means, again, moving a price or pricing a product low in a particular country and then raising the price later in order to gain an unfair advantage when you put other people out of business. Counterfeit products, we know about that, especially in those particular countries that don't have intellectual property laws. Oftentimes they'll use the Apple logo, they'll use the AT&T logo or some other logo out there in order to make counterfeit products. And in those particular countries, oftentimes they can get away with it. Then the final thing that I want to talk about is gray market. Gray market pricing means, or gray market is not necessarily a pricing strategy, but it's more of a product distribution strategy. Gray market means it's not a black market. You're not selling illegal products, but what you're doing is you're selling products in a country that's not meant for that country. Let me give you an example. When I worked for Bausch & Lomb, we had a distributor in Miami. That distributor was supposed to distribute products into Latin and South America. So we would sell a product into Miami, into this distributor, and they would indirect export it into Latin America and South American countries. We would sell those products to this indirect exporter at a very low price because of PPP. If contact lenses were sold at $15 per lens here in the United States, we would sell that to that particular distributor for about $2 or $3, and then he would sell it based on PPP for about $5 or $6 to the doctors in those Latin American countries. However, this particular distributor, and instead of taking those products that he bought for $2 and selling it, because it's the same product, selling it into Latin America and South America, he would turn around and sell it into our distributor network in Chicago, into Boston, into the Midwest, etc., and make huge profits on it. It's not illegal because once he buys those products, he can do anything that he wants with it. However, it's against company policy. That's the gray market. Those products that are destined for a market that are lower cost because of PPP, that are sold back into the market in which they are made at huge profits for those indirect distributors, create what we call a gray market. It was very difficult for our distributor network to compete against them. It was also very hard for our direct reps to compete against that gray market. So that's what's called a gray market. You manufacture it in London. You are selling it to an indirect exporter for indirect export into China at a very low price. That indirect exporter, instead of selling it into China, will turn around and sell it someplace into Western Europe or into Eastern Europe at huge markups. And again, that's what we call the gray market. The final of the 4 P's of the marketing mix is place or distribution. Distribution is also very difficult and a very challenging decision for a marketing manager. Not as much really as price or product, but still we need to understand how do we get our product to those other countries. And once we get it to the other countries, where are we going to sell it? Are we going to sell it online? Are we going to sell it through a store? Are we going to sell it through a distribution network? Are we going to sell it through a wholesale network? How are we going to do that? And what is going to be the most profitable? One of the things that we need to understand, and one of the things that we need to consider is the more people within the channel, the less your profit margin is going to be, because everybody within that channel has to take a cut. So sometimes in some particular cases, the producing organization will set up their own distribution network within their own organization in order to not give the profit margin to somebody else. In some particular cases, if they don't have the connections within the international distribution chain or the value chain, they can't do that, and they have to set up an international intermediary or an international marketing channel. So it starts with the seller. And the seller is usually, generally speaking, the producer. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but usually, generally speaking, it is. And then you've got to take a look at where's your international marketing headquarters. Is it going to be within that country you're going to do business, or is it someplace else? Then you've got to have your channels between nations. How are you going to get it from one country to another? And then you've got to have your channel inside that nation. Once it lands on the docks, once it's shipped over there, whether it be on rail, whether it be via boat or airplane or what have you, how are you going to get it from that port of entry to your distribution networks? And then what are your distribution networks, whether it's going to be retail, wholesale, B2B, or what have you. So there's all kinds of channel differences. Really, it depends on the product. It depends on the weight of the product. For instance, even though I could produce paper when I worked for Xerox, even though I could produce paper very, very economically here in the United States because of our vast supply of pulp and our vast natural resources, there was no way I could produce paper here and ship it to another country. It's just too heavy at too low of a profit margin. So I had to absolutely have different manufacturers throughout my entire distribution network. And then I had to decide, how am I going to get it from that manufacturer to those end users, which were usually B2B? Was I going to use a distributor? Was I going to use a wholesaler? Was I going to use a retailer? So very, very difficult decisions. Again, it depends really on the product in which you're selling, depending on the margin if you're selling. If it's a very low margin product, you're going to have a few distributors. If it's a very high margin product, you're going to have quite a few distributors in order to get it to the end user. And then finally, the last thing that we've got to decide is, how are you going to set up your marketing organization? Is it going to be functional, so that you've got an organization that is marketing, and then you've got an organization that is production, you got an organization that is, say, accounting or what have you? Are you going to set it up geographically? So you're going to have all of those functions within, say, Western Europe, and then all of those functions within, say, Asia, etc. Are you going to set it up based on product or brand management? Are you going to set it up based on marketing management? Generally speaking, most people use a geographic organization where they set up an organization in a particular region of the world, and that organization has all the marketing and sales functions as well as the distribution functions, as well often in cases as the production function, and that way they have the accounting function, etc. Because accounting rules, because different marketing rules, etc., is different in different regions of the world. Oftentimes, it's set up functional organizations by geographic. It doesn't have to be, but generally speaking, that's usually the fallback on most international organizations. And if you look at GE as the model, that's exactly what GE does. So now let's change courses, and as I talked about at the beginning of the lecture, let's talk about socially responsible marketing. You know, companies by law have to be environmental friendly. There's emissions requirements and things like that. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, I think that companies have a social responsibility to go beyond what's required of them in order for sustainability in our planet, especially here in the United States, because we are a very rich country. We do have a lot of resources at our disposal, and we should be the leader of ethics, of values, of sustainability, and of social responsibility. And in many cases, we are the leader. But there's things that we need to show the world, that we, being a very wealthy nation, being a vast nation with multiple resources at our disposal, need to be excruciatingly ethical and have strong values. And we need to understand the social pressures and the opportunities facing. Oftentimes, some companies will say, well, it's expensive to be environmentally friendly. I disagree with that, because I think if you market it right, I think you could actually charge more for your product. And I think people would pay more for your product for social responsibility and for being socially responsible. One of the things that you actually as consumers and you as managers, when you become managers, need to understand is consumers have a choice. And we are going to be affluent enough that we can make our choice based on whether we feel that company is ethically responsible and socially responsible and environmentally sustainable versus someone who's not. There is no global watchdog out there. There is no global police force. The people that make sure that companies are ethically responsible and environmentally responsible are consumers. And they can choose to do business without them. Take M&M Mars, for instance. M&M Mars have made a commitment to get off of fossil fuels by 2025. Only renewable energy within their factories. To me, that's being ethically and socially responsible, as well as environmentally responsible. And I would pay more for an M&M's chocolate, or an M&M Mars chocolate, than I would for, say, Hershey's, if Hershey's is not, say, socially responsible. I'm not saying that they're not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just using that example because I know M&M Mars has made a commitment to do that. I don't know about Hershey's, so I'm not saying anything against them. So they need to understand the pressures and the opportunities. And there is opportunities out there to market yourself as a social responsible company and do very well in that. So you got to take a look at your legal behavior, okay? And legal behavior goes beyond just, being sued. Do you have a glass ceiling out there? And a glass ceiling means that minorities and women can see the top, and the C-suite, but they can't get there because of the ceiling that's put upon them artificially or arbitrarily. Is there a wage gap? I know that Audi has been a strong proponent in narrowing the wage gap. And let's face it, there is a wage gap out there. Generally speaking, it's 72%. Women make 72% of their male counterparts. And that, even though that is not, it's hard to prove that, and it's very hard to catch that, companies need to have an ethical responsibility towards that. Are they being legally responsible? Are they being socially responsible? And are they being sustainable? And are they greenwashing? There are companies out there that claim they're sustainable, but when you look behind, you peel back the onion, they really aren't. And those are some of the companies that we need to look at. There's also companies that are sustainable in their own right, but their suppliers are not sustainable because they're getting the lowest possible cost. Just because they're sustainable, if they are buying from people who are not sustainable, then they're just as bad. They are just as guilty. It goes back to that international pulp thing from the pulp coming out of Brazil. Even though I was being sustainable, because I'm buying from someone who's not, it's still greenwashing. It's still claiming to be sustainable when I'm not. And so that's why I'm glad that I didn't buy that pulp. Cause-related marketing is part of corporate societal marketing or corporate social marketing. Cause-related marketing, you see it all the time with buckets of chicken. And again, we talked about that. I've never had a bucket of chicken, and I plan to do so. I plan to find the time. I just haven't had one yet. But if you look at the bucket of chicken from Kentucky Fried Chicken, they do buckets for the cure, for breast cancer awareness, and other cause-related marketing. We see it all the time where people donate a portion of their proceeds to different causes. Wegmans, the Feed the Bus campaign. They're going to start that probably within the next couple of weeks, where you can make a donation to feed those hungry children that are not getting fed over the weekends. Oftentimes they're getting fed in school because they're getting free meals in school, but when they leave on Friday night, they don't eat again until Monday morning. And that's those types of cause-related issues that we, as a affluent country, need to make sure that we're taking advantage of. So cause-related marketing can build brand awareness. It can build brand loyalty. It can build emotional ties to brand, good brand feelings. All of these different things, all these bubbles you see in front of you are reasons to do cause-related marketing, and that's why they do it. One of the things, and I said this before when we talked about public relations, one of the things is we've got to make sure that we're not doing it just for our own profit, but we're doing it really, truly to make a difference in the world. So that concludes your very last video lecture for the year. I hope you learned something. I'm not sure you enjoyed them, but I hope you learned something. As always, your assignment is to write a 1.5 to 2 page memo to your boss or your fictitious, I think I spelled fictitious wrong there, didn't I? Or your fictitious boss, letting me know the key points in the video lecture. Turn it in to me via hard copy on Monday, and as always, I look forward to seeing you on Monday.